Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we are doing a strategy analysis of this run-based Andromeda versus ETF matchup. Now, as with most Andromeda games that I do analysis of, pause the video right now and tell me what your first move will be. My opponent, ETF, ends on 13 credits and ice on HQ. No ice on R&D or archives and no remotes. They have 13 credits because they did an advanced assembly lines play and play a hedge fund. So, how would you open? Well, this is actually a rather straightforward opening hand, so I'm not going to go into too much detail over it. Basically, as with most openings, you want to start off by building up your engine, both your economy and your card draw. There's no card draw here, so you'll only be building up economy, and there's no more sensible play than to play gamble, daily cast, employee strike. Some other choices. Temujin contracts. Typically, you do want to get Temujin off ASAP because you don't want to allow the corp to ice up all the central servers before you plop down the Temujin. In this case, however, given that my opponent only managed to find one ice on HQ, I can kind of gather that they don't have much ice, so I should still be able to get the Temujin off turn 2. More importantly, I only have 2 run-based cards in my hand. Laundry and Temujin. So if I try to empty out the Temujin, I'll be forced to actually spend... I have to discard a couple of cards and I want all the cards in my hand, so that's bad. Another possible choice was to play Dirty Laundry on the last click instead of Employee Strike. Because Employee Strike... you want to play Employee Strike as early as possible so that it will last as long as possible before the corp scores an agenda. So therefore, it is very obvious that Strike is something that should be played on turn 1 rather than something that you wait for later on. Moreover, if this is a food codes variant of ETF, food codes tends not to score agendas early, so this employee strike will be online for a very long time, therefore hindering my opponent's economy rather severely. This is quite a good thing, even though my opponent seems to be very rich now, and I kind of capitalize on that to make to jest my opponent in the chat, saying that, well, you have too much money, this employee strike is doing nothing. In actual fact, every credit counts, especially when HB's ice is so expensive to res. Never underestimate how much money a single employee strike can deny. So I'm gonna get the employee strike going, and because I expect my opponent to try to rush an agenda early to turn off strike, I got a Gordian Blade out, which I can then use to slice through Turing. I knew it was a Turing on the remote because I saw it on R&D when I was doing my Temujin runs on turn 2. This is turn 3, and I'm going to get through the remote. And my opponent shows a caprice. I can choose to jack out, or I can choose to go into the server. Again, I think that my opponent's harboring an agenda in the server. Otherwise, it makes a lot of sense to do so, given that there's an employee strike causing a lot of pressure on the economy. I failed the side game, they bid 2, I bid 0, so I'm gonna quit it and run R&D instead to fetch more Temujin money. I see a Sansan City grid here, which is quite interesting. Very difficult debate. I chose not to trash it for 2 reasons. Firstly, if I trash it, my opponent gets to draw another card instead, so they're not really being set back. More importantly, they can use friends to recur Sansan. So I'm basically not going to be able to keep up with Sansan if I have to constantly trash it via friends. So I'm going to give up that war. What I'm trying to win, the war I'm trying to win, is the economy war. If I'm going to allow my opponent to score an agenda off a Sansan. However, if they rest the Sansan to do so, I'll be sure to trash the Sansan. That way, my opponent's economy will be crippled, and hopefully that will open up other avenues for me to attack. So I'm not going to attack the fast advance mechanism itself, I'm going to attack my opponent's economy. And I can do so because I have 2 siphons in my hand. But I'm not going to siphon just yet. My opponent's not at the credit level where I really want to siphon. You want to siphon your opponent when resing all their ice. HQ ice would leave them with 5 credits left so that you can still siphon them down. 9 credits isn't a very safe spot because if they res something like a fetch out 3, for example, you have to click through the whole server, and when you get to the end of it, they only have 3 credits for you to siphon, which basically wastes the siphon. You want to get maximum mileage out of your siphon, so typically you want to wait till they're in the double digits to get the siphon off. In the meantime, my opponent ices the remote there, therefore telegraphing that they probably want to get something going in that remote. Therefore, attacking HQ is probably a wise choice and something that I should have done. I did not attack HQ that turn, but I really should have. Instead, I was drawing up to find more breakers. Because I used my first special order on the Gordian Blade to get past the remote Turing, I'm set behind in terms of my breaker setup because in most games I could have got by with the passport in my hand, but this game that's not the case. I I wasn't able to save up the special order for a Fractal or a Killer, which is limiting my aggression somewhat. I am wary of the fact that my opponent might be running Snake, the Cobra. That's a very scary piece of ice to run into and will knock out my only remote decoder. That is a bad idea. So I'm trying to balance aggression and setting up here. I need to find my subsequent breakers. In the meantime, you see me get another employee strike up. I draw my second copy of it, and I do not hesitate to drop it down immediately. As I said, I need to win the economy war. If my opponent gets too rich, I'm going to lose the game. As I said, my opponent can just stick a sand in the remote and fast advance, churn out agendas through it, and that's what I do not want to have happen. As I mentioned earlier, I needed to balance aggression and building up, and oftentimes the right answer is to poke HQ every now and then. That's the best form of aggression you can provide. I didn't really do it that much this game, as I showed there. I did poke HQ a bit there, but not getting too much out of it, and I really should be poking a bit more because likelihood my opponent has 1 or 2 agendas in the HQ that I could be fetching. Because if you look at it, at this point, it might be safer for my opponent to jam agendas in server 2 instead of keeping them in hand. So that's another thing you have to think about when you're trying to evaluate whether it's good to run HQ. Anyway, criminals do have a lot of impetus to run HQ. Most notably, you can get pull-up installs. If you force your opponent to res ice, you get more information, etc. There's a lot of benefit that comes to running HQ, and as a criminal, you really should be doing it pretty often, even though you're not Gabe or Los. Now, back to my opponent. They play Friends to get purely just to get money, it seems. They install 2 advanced assembly lines with the Friends, using one of them to install more ice and another to install some card in the remote. Because this was installed by advanced assembly lines, I knew that was not an agenda, so I was not pressured to run it. So that's something I can leave alone for now. Now I'm gonna get a breaker out. I prioritize the mongoose before the paperclip because I can always bounce off barriers, but if I hit a Snake, Cobra, I want to make sure I'm able to break the subroutines. Now my opponent shows an Adonis that was installed in the new server, and I'm immediately going for it. This is something that most runners actually underestimate, the value of trashing campaigns. In most games, HB ETF will get 1 or 2 campaigns off, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't contest the rest. If there are naked campaigns out there, there's no reason not to trash them, especially when they are not accompanied by Breaker Bay Grid. Of course, Breaker Bay changes the maths a bit because you're spending a lot of money to trash campaigns when they can simply easily recur it with Friends. However, if it's just a single campaign protected by a single piece of ice, there is absolutely no reason not to go for it. Because that campaign will do your opponent a lot more good than it will set your tempo back. You can make money a lot quicker and easier than the Corp can. So denying Adonises and Eves are key, especially if you are able to be as rich as Andromeda. Of course, most of this is is on a case-by-case basis. In this case, you can see that I have a wealthy stash, 17 credits to my name. This is why it's very trivial for me to run that server and trash the Adonis, clicking through the Eli. If you're slightly poorer, if you're gonna break your back, get out of sure gamble range to trash a campaign, maybe you should consider not doing that. You don't want to go into the 0 to 4 credit range because that opens up a window for your opponent to begin scoring. It also means that it's much harder for you to recover. Your opponent can more easily abuse you. Speaking of abuse, I'm abusing my opponent right here. I played an account siphon, removing 2 tags and setting them back down to 4 credits. When they are on 4 credits, corps are very hard pressed to threaten you. With so few credits, it's very difficult to rest any dangerous ice. Therefore, I felt safe running last click into R&D to get my Temujin money and trashing a Jackson along the way. Even though there's a Jackson already installed, I'm still trashing this one. As you can see from my hand, my win condition is right there, the keyhole. I do not want Jacksons floating around, certainly not in my opponent's hand. Therefore, I need to get rid of the Jackson if I see it on top of R&D. That's a must kill, unlike Sense City Grid. So that's sent in the bin. You'll notice that while this might seem like a good time to play Keyhole, obviously I can't because there's a Res Jackson on the table. I'll have to deal with that first, and I'm not quite interested in running through an Eli to do that because I suspect my opponent might have Friends. So if I'm spending my whole turn just to attack a Jackson that my opponent recurs with Friends, I'm not coming out ahead. Instead, I'm going to hopefully induce my opponent to use Jackson one way or another, be it shuffling agendas back in hand, reshuffling cards from archives into R&D or something. Hopefully they'll do that sooner or later. In any case, I'm not that much in a hurry to get the keyhole going. Even though criminals excel early game and taper off late game, I still think it's a bit too early to go for the keyhole here. Instead, what I want to do right here is to continue snooping out my opponent, running HQ, making sure that they're really being honest, that they have no agendas in hand, and hopefully induce them into scoring off what I believe is the Sand in server 2. If they score off the Sand, they're going to break their economy, at which point I can swoop in for an easy keyhole. Whereas if they choose, if I attack with keyhole while they have 8 credits, they can easily play more defensively, and that's bad for me. I want to trip them up into making a mistake like they're doing right now. My opponent installs into server 2 and attempts to score. Scoring against criminal early game is usually a bad idea, especially if it's going to bring you down to 0 credits, and this is where I can start really punishing my opponent. Unfortunately, I forgot this was a thing. With a Raz Jackson on the board, my opponent's able to trigger an ABT. Therefore, they get free ice on the board. That's a problem. Thankfully, they put the free ice on the remote. That Eli should be on R&D or HQ. But by icing up the remote, my opponent committed a big mistake. They are now leaving the centrals open to assault, and I have the tools to punish them for that. And this is one reason why I was withholding my keyhole threat. Leveraging on hidden information like in your hand like this is one of the reasons I love Crim so much. And it's gonna help me a lot in this scenario where my opponent's completely broke and have no way to defend HQ or R&D at all. So I have a variety of options here. I could easily drop the keyhole and keyhole to my heart's liking, even through the Jackson Howard. I can just keep hitting archives every time and forcing him to use Jackson. But here I thought the best line of play was actually to run server 2. Fearing that my opponent might be flooded with agendas, I decided to remove completely the threat of my opponent scoring out by destroying this Caprice and Sand. They can't even play the Caprice side game, so I save on my Polop here. You notice I installed a Polop earlier on an earlier HQ run. Well, I don't really need it for Caprice anymore. Now that I've trashed it without using it, I can now use my Polop for some more interesting uses, like trashing that Jackson Howard in that remote that I can't really get to right now. Another viable option for me was to use Special Order that was in my hand to fetch Paperclip and then pitch it to the bin. This way I can threaten the Jackson Howard server later, but that will cost me a lot of money, setting up the Paperclip and running through Eli. I'm not exactly that rich right now. I do have a lot of money on the Temujin, and I plan to get all of that money out. So after asking for reactions, well, I didn't really ask for reactions, I paused a bit, trashed the Jackson, and then went in for a keyhole straight up. On 2 credits, my opponent cannot possibly do anything, and I start milling the deck like crazy, seeing 2 agendas both times. I think on the first mill I should have tried to go for a global food instead of a 3-2 agenda, because global food would win my opponent in 1 score, whereas it's quite hard to say because at this point I don't think my opponent can viably score a global food from that remote, given that I have I don't know. It's pretty close. My opponent could very well score a global food because I've lost the Polop threat right now. Even though there's another Polop left in my deck, better safe than sorry. I think milling the global food would have been the better option. But in any case, my opponent now resists a new threat, not agenda threat, but economy threat. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest problem with criminal against HB is that you tend to fizzle out late game when they set up a lot of economy and have a lot of ice going. This is exactly what my opponent's doing right now, and I can't really contest the Eve remote. I guess I could, but I'll be spending a lot of resources. That's 7 to trash the whole remote, plus 4 credits for Turing, 3 credits for the Eli. That's basically all my bank. I can't really do that. And now my opponent gets an advanced assembly lines to re-ice HQ. So now that R&D. So now R&D is more taxing. I have to go for the next least well-protected server, and that's HQ. And we all know Criminal excels at pressuring HQ with a timely account siphon. That's exactly what I'm going for. I hit a nasty Sherlock 2.0. My opponent spent all their money to res that Sherlock. The good news is obviously that they break themselves, leaving themselves with 0 credits. Arguably, the correct option here would be to break the Sherlock normally and then go for 3 keyhole runs. That actually would have been the best thing for me to do. So this was a gameplay mistake. I should have broken the Sherlock manually. Even though it cost a bomb, I would have gotten 3 free keyholes, and that would have basically won me the game due to me having Mad Dash in my hand right now. Instead, I have to wait one more turn, which means that my opponent gets up to 5 credits, clicking for credits. So now I'm basically forced to check the remote, make sure that that's not a Jackson Howard. Better safe than sorry, make sure that everything's fine with that. It is actually the Jackson Howard, so my opponent is going to empty it. And this allows me to get unfettered keyhole access, from which I should win the game. All I need is to mill one agenda and I can mad dash into archives for the victory. Let's see if I get it, and let's see if my opponent can put up any opposition to R&D with only 5 credits. It seems like they cannot. This is the problem when HP doesn't have enough money. If I had to guess, the eyes on R&D are none other than Fairchild 3, maybe another Sherlock 2. So yeah, with such easy access to R&D, it was only a matter of time before I was able to close out the game with a mad dash for the win. Now for some after action review. I think I was rather flexible with my moves this game. Instead of holding myself into a single plan, like early attack HQ early, draw keyhole mid game, and keyhole my opponent late game, I always adapted to what my opponent was doing. Every time they installed a new remote card, I asked myself, is that going to be of any threat? If it is, should I run it? And this is actually quite an important consideration. As mentally burdened as Netrunner is, it is still very important to consider all your options, especially as criminal, because you can place so much pressure on all servers. You'll also notice that I was basically holding the keyhole from the start of the game right to the finish, and this might be a bit questionable, but I do feel like, as per what the green text say, you do want to get to the mid game as keyhole Andromeda, because that's where she shines the most. That mid game is where you can still penetrate through servers, yet you have worked your way through most of your deck, which means that you probably have drawn your keyhole and mad dash by then, and this is quite important. Against a deck that runs only 2 pointers, you really want to get the mad dash off, thereby allowing you to win in 3 agenda scores instead of 4. That is actually quite important. The final point to note is that some players have the very bad habit of leaning on the hate cards to deal with certain corp tech. So like with Caprice, for example, it's a very bad habit to just completely lean on Polop to get rid of Caprice. If a situation presents itself where the obvious play is to run and trash Caprice without using Polop, then by all means you really should, as I did this game. That allowed me to free up my Polop for use on Jackson Howard, which enabled me to begin terrorizing with Keyhole that much quicker. So yeah, there's lots of nuances to playing with run-based Andromeda, but overall she's still a very strong runner, and a good core play is needed to defend very well against such a strong runner. I'm not going to post a deck list for this particular run-based Andromeda build because there's no need to. You should be able to recreate it yourself from scratch, because most of run-based Andromeda builds itself. Try putting all the good criminal and neutral cards in an Andromeda shell and you will have at least 32 or 45 of the cards that you need. So it shouldn't be too difficult to recreate the deck. If you're not aware of this basic draw, tutor, and run-based economy engine of Good Stuff Criminal, net decking a list won't really help you. I would suggest going to JNet to spectate more Andromeda games or searching for more Andromeda gameplay videos online, because that will help you much more than just net decking a list and not really knowing which are the key cards that form the basis of their economy and draw engine. Hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. In the meantime, thanks for watching as always, and happy net running. I'll see you around.